The rain hammered against the windows of their suburban Phoenix home as Emma Matthews sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of unpaid bills and rejection letters. The monsoon season had arrived early this year, bringing with it the kind of storm that made the desert feel alive with electricity and possibility. But inside their perfectly appointed kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, Emma felt anything but alive. The stack of papers seemed to grow taller each day, a monument to her failures. At least, that's what David always called them. Credit card statements with minimum payments that barely touched the principal, utility bills that seemed to increase every month, and most painfully, rejection emails from potential clients printed out in black and white. Each "thank you for your submission, but we've decided to go in a different direction," felt like another nail in the coffin of her dreams. "You're dreaming again, Emma." David's voice cut through the silence like a blade. He stood in the doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled from another late night at the office, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the storm outside. Freelance graphic design. Really, you couldn't even handle being a secretary at that dentist's office? Emma's fingers tightened around the latest rejection email she'd printed out, the paper slightly damped from her sweaty palms. The client had said her portfolio was interesting but not quite what we're looking for. The words stung because they were so vague, so dismissive. What wasn't quite right? Her color choices, her typography, her entire approach to design? The uncertainty was almost worse than outright criticism. "I know I can do this, David," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunder that rolled across the Sonoran desert. "I just need more time to build up my client base. Maybe if I could take that online course in advanced Photoshop techniques, or if we could upgrade my software to the latest version, ... David laughed, but there was no humor in it tonally. The bitter edge of a man who'd heard this conversation too many times before. Emma, you've been at this for 6 months. 6 months of me paying all the bills while you play artist on that ancient laptop?" He gestured dismissively at her setup in the corner of the kitchen, a folding table with her old MacBook, surrounded by sketches and color swatches that looked more like a child's art project than a professional workspace. The laptop in question was 7 years old, a graduation gift from her parents that had seen better days. The screen flickered occasionally, and the battery lasted maybe 2 hours on a good day. David had promised to help her buy a new one when your business takes off, but that qualifier had been hanging over her head for months now, growing heavier. With each passing rejection, Emma felt the familiar sting of tears behind her eyes, hot and unwelcome. At 32, she'd spent the last 8 years of their marriage hearing variations of this same speech, each one chipping away at her confidence like water wearing down stone. When she'd wanted to go back to school to finish her art degree, David had said it was a waste of money. They didn't have money that somehow materialized when he wanted new golf clubs or a weekend trip to Vegas with his college buddies. When she'd tried to start a blog about design and creativity, he'd called it cute in a way that made her feel like a child playing dress-up in grown-up clothes. And now, when she was finally pursuing something she was passionate about, something that made her feel alive for the first time in years, he was crushing that dream too. "You know what your problem is?" David continued, loosening his tie, as he walked to the refrigerator with the confident stride of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. "You've been sheltered for so long, you have no idea what the real world is like. You think success just happens because you want it badly enough. You couldn't survive a week without me taking care of everything. The bills, the car, the house, all of it." The words hit Emma like a physical blow, settling into her chest with the weight of accumulated years of similar pronouncements. She looked around their kitchen, the granite countertops David had insisted on because they showed class, the stainless steel appliances he'd chosen without consulting her because you don't understand the technical specifications, the perfect suburban dream that felt more like a prison with each passing day. Every design choice in their home reflected David's taste, David's vision of success, David's idea of what their life should look like. "That's not true," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Even as the words left her mouth, she could hear how weak they sounded. "How unconvincing, isn't it?" David grabbed a beer and popped it open with more force than necessary, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. "When was the last time you paid a bill? Fixed something when it broke? Hell, when was the last time you even pumped your own gas? You live in a bubble, Emma, and you think that bubble is the real world." Emma opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. He was right about some things, and that knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone. David had always handled their finances with an iron fist, keeping her on an allowance like she was a teenager. He'd managed their car maintenance, scheduling appointments, and talking to mechanics while she waited in the car feeling invisible. Their household repairs were his domain, and he'd made it clear that her attempts to help were more hindrance than assistance. He'd said he was protecting her, taking care of her, shielding her from the harsh realities of adult life. But somewhere along the way, taking care of had become controlling and protecting had become isolating. She'd become a stranger in her own life, dependent on his expertise, his connections, his approval for everything from how she spent money to which friends she could see. "I thought you loved me," she said quietly, the words barely audible over the rain that had started again outside. "I do love you," David replied, but his tone suggested he was already tired of the conversation, already mentally moving on to more important matters. His attention had shifted to his phone, which had buzzed with what was probably a work email or a text from one of his buddies planning their next golf outing. "That's why I'm trying to save you from embarrassing yourself further. You're not cut out for this business stuff, Emma. You don't understand competition, profit margins, client management, any of it. You're good at other things. You make great coffee, you keep the house clean, He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound too condescending. "You're a good wife. You're supportive. You don't complain much. You make our home comfortable. Why isn't that enough?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unspoken resentment and unfulfilled dreams. Emma stared at the man she'd married, the man who'd once made her feel like she could conquer the world with his support and encouragement, and realized she couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at her with pride instead of pity. When had his love become so conditional, so limiting? "Because I want more," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I want to create something meaningful, to contribute something valuable to the world, to feel like I matter beyond these four walls. I want to wake up excited about my day instead of dreading another 24 hours of emptiness." David's expression hardened, his jaw setting in the way it did when he was about to deliver a pronouncement he considered final. "You matter to me. You matter to our marriage, to our home, to our life together. Isn't that enough?" "No," Emma said, and the word surprised them both with its firmness, its finality. She could see David's shock in the slight widening of his eyes, the way his hand tightened around his beer bottle. She'd never contradicted him so directly before, never stated her own needs so clearly. "It's not enough anymore. I need to matter to myself too." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the storm continued its assault on their perfect suburban home, but inside, something had shifted. Emma could feel it in her chest. Tiny spark of defiance that she'd thought David had extinguished. Years ago, David set down his beer with a sharp clink. "Fine, you want to be independent. You want to prove you can make it on your own." His voice was rising now, 8 years of frustration spilling out. "Maybe you should try it." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm tired of this, Emma. Tired of supporting your pipe dreams. Tired of being the bad guy for being realistic. You think you can do better without me? Go ahead and try." Emma's heart was racing now. "David, please. Let's talk about this when you're not angry." "I'm not angry," he said, but his clenched fists told a different story. "I'm done. I've been thinking about this for a while, and maybe we both need a break." "A break." The word came out as a whisper. "I'm going to stay at my brother's place. For a while. You can have your independence, Emma. Let's see how well you do without me covering for you." The rain outside seemed to pause, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Emma stared at David, searching his face for any sign that he was bluffing, that this was just another way to make her feel small and dependent. "You're leaving?" she asked. "I'm giving you what you want," David said, but his voice was cold now. "A chance to prove yourself. Don't call me when you realize you can't handle it." Emma watched as he walked out of the kitchen, listened to his footsteps on the stairs, heard the sounds of him packing. Each noise felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. Part of her wanted to run after him, to apologize, to beg him to stay. But a bigger part, the part that had been quietly suffocating for years, felt something unexpected. Relief an hour later, David stood in their doorway with 2 suitcases, looking every inch the successful businessman he'd always prided himself on being. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt electric, with the promise of more storms to come. "I'll be back in a month," he said, not meeting her eyes. "That should be enough time for you to come to your senses." Emma nodded, not trusting. Her voice, she watched as he loaded his car, watched as he drove away down their tree-lined street without looking back. Only when his taillights disappeared around the corner did she allow herself to break down. She sank onto their front porch, still wearing the same clothes she'd had on all day, and cried. She cried for the marriage that had slowly died without her noticing, for the dreams she'd let slip away, for the woman she'd become, small, dependent, afraid of her own shadow. But as the tears dried and the neighborhood settled into its nighttime quiet, Emma felt something else stirring in her chest. It was small and fragile, like a seedling pushing through concrete, but it was there. Hope. She looked back at the house, their house. Now just her house and, For the first time in years, she didn't see a prison. She saw possibility standing up. Emma walked back inside and closed the door behind her with a decisive click. The house felt different, already larger somehow, as if David's absence had created space she hadn't known she was missing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new bills to pay, new problems to solve without anyone to call for backup. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, she was alone with her thoughts and her dreams, free to explore who she might become without someone else's voice drowning out her own inner wisdom. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what she needed. She walked through the house, seeing it with fresh eyes. The living room with its neutral beiges and grays that David had insisted were timeless and sophisticated. The dining room they never used because David preferred eating in front of the TV. The master bedroom with its masculine furniture and dark colors that had never felt like hers. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to imagine what these spaces might look like if they reflected her personality instead of his preferences. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The first week without David was in controlled chaos. Emma discovered that running a household alone was like trying to juggle while riding a unicycle. Everything seemed to go wrong at once, but somehow she managed to keep most of the balls in the air. Each small victory felt monumental, each setback like a potential catastrophe. It started with the garbage disposal on Tuesday morning. Dottima was washing dishes from the lonely dinner she'd made the night before. Simple pasta dish that had somehow turned into enough food for 4 people. Living alone meant everything came in quantities designed for families or couples. She was learning to navigate a world built for pairs when you were suddenly, definitively single. The kitchen sink started making a sound like a dying walrus as she rinsed the last plate. Water began backing up, carrying with it the remnants of last night's dinner and what looked suspiciously like coffee grounds from that morning. She stared at the growing pool of murky water, watching pieces of garlic and herbs swirl in an unappetizing dance. Her first instinct was to call David. Her finger hovered over his contact information for a full minute, muscle memory almost stronger than her resolve. How many times had she called him to handle the man problems around the house? How many times had she played helpless when she could have figured things out herself? You can figure this out, she told herself, rolling up her sleeves. The water was cold and greasy against her hands as she reached into the sink to clear the drain cover. 3 YouTube videos and 45 minutes later, Emma had successfully unclogged the disposal using a plunger, a wire coat hanger she'd straightened out, and a technique involving ice cubes and dish soap that she'd learned from a cheerful woman with a southern accent who ran a home maintenance channel. Her victory dance in the kitchen was interrupted by the doorbell, but not before she took a moment to appreciate the clear, freely flowing water. Double quotes, Mrs. Matthews. The man at the door was wearing a uniform and holding a clipboard. "I'm here about your car registration. It expired last month." Emma's heart sank. David had always handled their car registrations, their insurance, their inspection stickers. She'd never even thought about it. I didn't realize," she said. "Ma'am, you can't drive with expired registration. You'll need to get this sorted out within the next week, or we'll have to impound the vehicle." After he left, Emma sat in her car in the driveway, staring at the dashboard. The inspection sticker was indeed expired. The registration was overdue, and she had no idea where David kept their insurance information. For a moment, the old Emma wanted to curl up in a ball and wait for someone else to fix everything instead. She started the engine and drove to the DMV, the line at the Department of Motor. Vehicles snaked around the building like a bureaucratic conga line of the defeated and determined. Emma took her number B47 and looked at the display board with growing dismay. They were currently serving B12, which meant she was looking at least a 2-hour wait, possibly more if the system was running slowly. She found a seat in the plastic chairs that seemed designed to discourage lingering, pulled out her phone, and tried to use the time productively by researching design trends and checking her email. But concentration was difficult when surrounded by the low-level chaos of bureaucracy and action babies crying, teenagers complaining, adults muttering under their breath about government inefficiency. "First time?" asked the woman sitting next to her. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair styled in a neat bob, and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Despite the institutional setting, she radiated a calm competence that Emma immediately envied. "That obvious," Emma replied with a rueful smile. "Honey, you've got that deer-in-headlights look. I'm Margaret, by the way. I've been coming here for 40 years and I've learned a thing or two about surviving this place." Margaret became Emma's unofficial DMV guide over the next hour and a half, explaining which forms she needed and where to get them, how to avoid the common pitfalls that could send you to the back of the line, and which clerks were helpful versus which ones seemed to view customer service as a personal affront. She shared stories of her own bureaucratic adventures, making Emma laugh despite the soul-crushing environment. "The secret," Margaret said with a conspiratorial whisper, "is to have all your paperwork organized in a folder. Smile even when you don't feel like it. And remember that most of these people are just trying to get through their day, like everyone else. A little kindness goes a long way." When Emma's number was finally called, she felt prepared. Armed with Margaret's wisdom and a folder of meticulously organized documents, she approached the window with something resembling confidence. "Next," barked the clerk, a woman who looked like she'd been carved from granite in disappointment. Emma approached the window with her stack of forms. Insurance card found in David's filing cabinet after an hour of searching and checkbook. "Registration, renewal, inspection, and I need to update my address," Emma said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The clerk, her name tag read. Dolores examined Emma's paperwork with the intensity of a forensic scientist. "You're missing form for B. Form for B." Emma's confidence wavered. "Address change form. You need form for B for address changes." Next window. Emma looked back at the line, which had somehow grown even longer in the past 2 hours. "But I don't want to change my address, I just want to update my registration." Dolores peered at Emma over her glasses. "Says here you want to update your address?" "No," I said, "I need to update my registration. I might have mentioned that I wasn't sure if my address was current, but ma'am, do you want to update your address or not?" Emma took a deep breath. "No, I do not want to update my address." "Then why did you say you did?" "I didn't say I did. I said I need to update my registration." Dolores stared at Emma for a long moment, then stamped her forms with unnecessary force. "That'll be $127.50. Walking out of the DMV with her new registration and inspection sticker clutched in her hand, Emma felt like she'd conquered Mount Everest. The simple pieces of paper represented so much more than legal compliance. They were proof that she could navigate complex systems, handle bureaucracy, and solve problems independently. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "How's the Independent? Life treating you? Running into any walls yet? Ready to admit you need help?" Emma looked at the message, then at her car with its shiny new stickers that she'd obtained through her own persistence and determination. She typed back, "Doing great. Just handled car registration all by myself. Learning something new every day. Thanks for asking." She didn't mention the 3 hours at the DMV, the expired inspection she'd had to get renewed at a gas station where the mechanic had been patient with her questions, or the fact that she'd cried in her car for 10 minutes after dealing with Dolores, not from sadness, but from relief and pride. Those were details David didn't need to know, struggles that belonged to her journey of self-discovery. The next challenge came Thursday evening when Emma was working on a logo design for a local coffee shop. Her first paying client in 3 weeks, the owner, Maria Santos, had found Emma through a Facebook group for local small businesses and was willing to pay $300 for a complete branding package. It wasn't much, but it felt like a fortune to Emma, who'd been living off her dwindling savings account since David left. The project was everything Emma had dreamed of: creative, collaborative, meaningful. Maria wanted something that captured the warmth and community spirit of her cafe, something that would make people feel welcome and understood. Emma had spent hours developing concepts, researching coffee culture, and sketching ideas that ranged from playful to sophisticated. She was deep in her design work, completely absorbed in perfecting the curve of a coffee cup handle, when the power went out without warning. The house plunged into darkness so complete it was disorienting. With the power went 3 hours of unsaved work, meticulous adjustments to typography, color refinements, and subtle design elements that had taken her most of the evening to perfect. Emma sat in the blackness, listening to the hum of the refrigerator dying, the silence where the air conditioning had been, and felt her carefully constructed optimism crumble like a house of cards. This was exactly the kind of moment when she would have called David. Exactly the situation that would have had him shaking his head and saying, "This is why you need someone to take care of these things." The old Emma would have panicked, would have sat in the dark crying about lost work and feeling helpless. But something had shifted in the weeks since he'd left. "Come on, Emma," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "You can do this. You've handled everything else so far." Using her phone's flashlight, she found candles and matches in the kitchen drawer. The power outage seemed to affect the whole neighborhood. She could see other houses dark against the night sky. Emma called the power company and learned that a transformer had blown in repairs. Wouldn't be complete until morning. That night, Emma ate peanut butter sandwiches by candlelight and worked on her designs the old-fashioned way with pencil and paper. She sketched logo concepts by the warm glow of vanilla-scented candles, played with typography using her collection of art markers, and found herself more creative than she'd been in months. Without the distraction of the internet, without the constant hum of electronics, without the ability to second-guess herself by researching what other designers were doing, she could think clearly. The silence was profound and liberating. No notifications pinging, no social media comparisons to distract her, no perfectionist tendencies enabled by the undo button. Just her ideas, and the simple pleasure of putting pencil to paper. She drew coffee cups with steam that formed. Hearts experimented with hand-lettered fonts that conveyed warmth and welcome, and created logo variations that felt more authentic than anything she'd produced on her computer. When the power came back on the next morning with a sudden flood of light and sound, Emma had 5 solid logo concepts sketched out, each one more inspired than the last. She spent the day refining them digitally. But the foundation, the creative spark, had happened in the candlelit quiet of the night before. "These are incredible," Maria said when Emma showed her the designs at the coffee shop. "You've captured exactly what I was looking for. How did you know I wanted something that felt both modern and welcoming?" Emma smiled, remembering her candlelit design session. Maria chose to design a stylized coffee cup with steam that formed the shape of a heart and paid Emma on the spot. It was the first time Emma had been paid for her own work in years, and the feeling was intoxicating. More than the money itself was what it represented: validation, independence, proof that her skills had value in the marketplace. She drove home with the cash in her purse and a lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt since she was young and full of dreams. That weekend, Emma decided to tackle the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, a project that David had been promising to fix for months but never quite got around to. "It's not that bad," he'd always said when she mentioned it. "We can live with it for a while longer." But now it was Emma's problem to solve, and she was determined to prove to herself more than anyone that she could handle it. She spent Saturday morning watching YouTube tutorials, taking notes like she was studying for a final exam. The videos made it look deceptively simple. But Emma had learned enough about home improvement to know that things were rarely as straightforward as they appeared online. She made a detailed list of supplies, measured the faucet components twice, and headed to the hardware store with the determined air of someone embarking on a quest. The Home Depot was intimidating in its vastness, acres of tools and supplies that might as well have been written in ancient Sanskrit. Emma wandered the aisles feeling like an explorer in unfamiliar territory, past displays of power tools that looked more like medieval torture devices, around sections devoted to electrical work that seemed to require an engineering degree. She found herself in the plumbing section staring at a wall of faucet parts washers and mysterious components that all looked vaguely similar but probably served completely different purposes. "Can I help you find something?" The voice belonged to a woman in her 40s wearing a Home Depot apron and a confident smile that suggested she actually knew what she was talking about. Her name tag read Janet, and she had the calloused hands of someone who worked with tools regularly. "I need to fix a leaky faucet," Emma said, feeling like she was confessing to a crime. "But I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. This is my first time attempting anything like this." "First time?" the woman asked, and Emma was getting used to this question that seemed to follow her everywhere in her new independent life. "Is it that obvious?" Emma laughed, gesturing at her clearly overwhelmed expression. "Honey, we all started somewhere. I'm Janet, and I've been in plumbing for 15 years, started right after my divorce, when I realized I was tired of waiting for other people to fix things for me. Let me guess your husband usually handles this stuff." Emma felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment and recognition. "Something like that. He's not around anymore to handle it." Janet's expression softened with understanding. "Well, you're about to learn that most plumbing problems are easier than they look, and you're a lot more capable than you think. What kind of faucet do you have? Single handle, double handle, pull-out sprayer?" An hour later, Emma left Home Depot with a bag of supplies and a crash course in basic plumbing that Janet had provided with the patience of a master teacher. Tools purpose with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved helping others discover their own capabilities. The actual repair took 3 hours and involved more cursing than Emma had done in the past year combined. She flooded the bathroom floor twice, stripped one screw head, and had to make a second trip to Home Depot for a part she'd installed backwards. But when she finally turned on the faucet and no water leaked from the base, Emma felt a surge of pride that surprised her with its intensity. She'd fixed something. She'd identified a problem, researched the solution, gathered the tools, and executed the repair. That night, she called her sister Sarah in Portland. "You fixed a faucet." Sarah's voice was incredulous. "You hate getting your hands dirty." "I know," Emma said, looking at her slightly grubby fingernails with pride. "But I did it. And you know what? It wasn't that hard once I figured out what I was doing." I'm proud of you, Em. How are you doing otherwise, really? Emma considered the question. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of small victories and minor disasters. She'd learned to manage her finances, paid her first utility bill, groceries, shopped for one instead of two, and even started sleeping better than she had in months. I'm doing okay, she said, and realized she meant it. Better than okay, actually? I'm discovering I can do things I never thought I could. And David? He texts sometimes asking if I'm ready to come to my senses yet. I think he's waiting. For me to beg him to come back, are you going to? Emma looked around her living room. She'd rearranged the furniture, bought fresh flowers for the coffee table, and hung some of her artwork on the walls, pieces David had always said were too colorful for the house. The space felt lighter, more like her. No, she said, and the certainty in her voice surprised her. I don't think I am. After hanging up, Emma sat in her newly arranged living room and opened her laptop. She had work to do to new client inquiries. Had come in that day and she wanted to respond while she was feeling confident. As she worked, Emma reflected on the past 2 weeks. Each small victory had built on the last, creating a foundation of self-reliance she hadn't known she possessed. The scared woman who'd watched David drive away was still there, but she was sharing space with someone new, someone capable, resourceful, and growing stronger every day. Emma smiled and got back to work. She had logos to design, bills to pay, and a life to build. And for the first time in years, she was excited to see what tomorrow would bring. 2 months after David left, Emma's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Her freelance graphic design business, which she'd decided to call Bloom Creative after a particularly inspiring conversation with Margaret about personal growth, was no longer just a dream. It was a reality that paid her bills and filled her with purpose. She hadn't felt in years. The name had come to her. During one of her early morning walks around the neighborhood, she'd started taking these walks as a way to clear her head and think about her business strategy. But they'd become something more, a daily ritual of self-discovery. Phoenix in the early morning was a different city than the scorching metropolis. It became by afternoon. The air was cool and crisp, the mountains visible in the distance, and the desert landscaping in her neighborhood looked almost ethereal in the soft light. The breakthrough came when Maria Santos, the coffee shop owner, posted Emma's logo design on social media. The response was immediate and overwhelming, like watching a spark catch fire and spread. 3 local businesses reached out within the first 24 hours, and word spread through Phoenix's tight-knit small business community like wildfire during the dry season. Emma's days now had a rhythm that felt entirely her own, orchestrated by her own priorities and passions rather than someone else's schedule and expectations. She woke up at 6 a.m. not because an alarm forced her to, but because she was excited to start working. The anticipation of creative challenges ahead had replaced the dread that used to greet her each morning. Her morning coffee was sipped while reviewing emails from potential clients, each new inquiry feeling like a small gift. Her makeshift office in the kitchen had evolved into a proper workspace in the spare bedroom, a transformation that had happened gradually as her confidence and income grew. The room that had once housed David's golf clubs that had cost more than Emma's entire computer setup, and his old college textbooks that he'd refused to donate because they were part of his intellectual legacy, now buzzed with creative energy. Emma had painted the walls a soft sage green that reminded her of desert sage in the early morning light. She'd hung inspiration boards covered with color palettes that spoke to her soul, typography samples that made her heart race with possibility, and sketches of her current projects that represented dreams becoming reality. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows. She'd dressed with flowing white curtains instead of David's heavy drapes, illuminating a space that was unmistakably hers. She'd added plants, lots of them, turning the room into a green oasis that felt alive and growing. A vintage drafting table she'd found at an estate sale served as her main workspace, its warm wood surface scarred with the creative endeavors of artists who'd come before her. Emma, these concepts are exactly what we were looking for, said Jennifer Kim, owner of a boutique fitness studio called Mindful Movement. They were meeting at a trendy cafe in downtown Phoenix, one of those places with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture that somehow created perfect harmony. Emma felt the familiar thrill of a client who truly understood her vision, who saw beyond the surface to the deeper meaning she tried to weave into every design. I wanted to capture that sense of inner strength and grace that your classes provide, Emma explained, showing Jennifer 3 logo variations on her tablet. The screen was crisp and bright. She'd finally been able to afford a proper device for client presentations. The flowing lines represent movement, but they also form the shape of a lotus flower, which symbolizes growth and transformation. Jennifer's eyes lit up. That's perfect. Transformation is exactly what we're about. My clients come to me feeling stuck, and they leave feeling empowered. Just like, she paused, studying Emma's face. Just like you seem to be doing. Emma smiled. It's been quite a journey, I can tell. There's something different about you compared to when we first met last month. You seem more present, more confident. Emma thought about Jennifer's observation as she drove home through the desert landscape that was beginning to feel like home again. The mountains in the distance were painted gold by the setting sun, and the city sprawled out before her, like a canvas of possibility. The confidence Jennifer had noticed was real, but it hadn't come overnight. It had been built through hundreds of small moments, successfully negotiating her first contract, learning to use professional design software she'd never had access to before, handling difficult clients with grace and professionalism. Last week, she'd even fired a client. The client, a restaurant owner named Brad, had been condescending from their first meeting. He'd questioned every design choice, demanded unlimited revisions, and made comments about how women designers were too emotional about their work. The old Emma would have endured his behavior, desperate to keep any source of income. But the new Emma had looked at Brad across the restaurant table and said, "I don't think we're a good fit for each other. I'm going to refund your deposit and recommend another designer who might be better suited to your vision." Brad had been stunned. "You can't just quit on me. I need this logo finished by next week." "I'm not quitting," Emma had replied calmly. "I'm choosing to work with clients who respect my expertise and treat me as a professional partner." Walking away from that toxic situation had felt like shedding a heavy coat. Emma was learning that independence wasn't just about being able to pay her own bills. It was about choosing who she wanted to work with, how she wanted to spend her time, and what kind of person she wanted to be. Her phone buzzed with a text. From David, "Heard through the grapevine that you're actually making money with your little art project. Don't get too comfortable, you know this won't last." Emma stared at the message, waiting for the familiar stab of self-doubt. But instead of hurt, she felt something unexpected: pity. David was so invested in her failure that he couldn't even acknowledge her success. She deleted the message without responding. That evening, Emma was working on a website design for a local veterinary clinic when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a woman with silver hair and a warm smile. Margaret, her DMV angel from months ago. "Margaret, what a surprise," Emma said, opening the door. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," Margaret said, holding up a plate covered with foil. "I made too much lasagna and I remembered you mentioning you lived in this neighborhood. I looked you up in the phone book." Emma invited Margaret in, touched by the unexpected kindness. As they sat in the living room eating lasagna and drinking wine, Emma learned that Margaret was a retired teacher who'd raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband died young. "I recognize the look you had at the DMV," Margaret said. "I had it too, 40 years ago. That deer-in-headlights expression of someone who's been thrust into independence, whether they wanted it or not." "How did you manage?" Emma asked. "Raising 3 kids alone in the 1980s couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," Margaret admitted. "But you know what I learned? When you're forced to be strong, you discover muscles you didn't know you had. I went back to school, got my teaching degree, bought my own house. I did things I never thought I could do." Margaret stayed for 3 hours, sharing stories of her journey from dependent wife to independent woman. When she left, Emma felt like she'd been given a glimpse of her own future, where this current chapter of struggle and growth would be just the beginning of something larger. The next morning brought Emma's biggest opportunity yet. A call from Rachel Torres, the marketing director for a mid-sized tech company in Phoenix. "We need a complete rebrand," Rachel explained during their meeting at the company's sleek downtown office. "New logo, website design, business cards, the works. This is a 6-month project with a budget of $15,000. Emma's heart raced. $15,000 would be more than she'd made in her entire freelance career so far. It would also be the biggest project she'd ever taken on. "I'd love to work with you," Emma said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Can you tell me more about your timeline and vision?" Over the next 2 hours, Rachel walked Emma through the project requirements. It was complex, challenging, and exactly the kind of work Emma had dreamed of doing. As they shook hands at the end of the meeting, Rachel smiled. "I have to tell you, Emma, you came highly recommended. Maria Santos at Roasted Dreams couldn't stop talking about your work. She said you were professional, creative, and a pleasure to work with." Emma felt a warm glow of pride. Her reputation was spreading, built on the foundation of work she was genuinely passionate about. That weekend, Emma decided to celebrate by redecorating her bedroom. It had been the one room she'd left unchanged since David's departure, still decorated in the neutral grays and beiges he'd preferred. But now, looking at the space with fresh eyes, Emma realized she wanted something that reflected who she was becoming. She spent Saturday at furniture stores and home improvement centers, Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The bedroom that emerged was a reflection of her growing confidence. Walls painted a warm terracotta, bedding in rich jewel tones, and artwork that made her smile every time she looked at it. Sunday evening, as Emma stood in her transformed bedroom, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was someone she barely recognized from 4 months ago. Her hair was styled differently, shorter, more modern. Her clothes fit better because she'd started paying attention to what she liked instead of what David thought was appropriate. But most importantly, her eyes held a light that had been missing for years. Her phone rang, interrupting her reflection. It was Sarah. "How's my independent sister doing?" Sarah asked. "I got a $15,000 contract," Emma said, still hardly believing it herself. "Emma, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of me too," Emma said, and realized it was the first time she'd said those words about herself in years. "You sound different," Sarah observed. "Happier? Stronger?" "I feel different," Emma admitted, "like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be." After hanging up, Emma sat on her newly decorated bed and opened her laptop. She had work to do. The tech company project was starting tomorrow, and she wanted to begin with sketches and research. But first, she opened her banking app and looked at her account balance. For the first time in her adult life, Emma had money she'd earned herself. Not a lot, but enough to pay her bills with some left over. More importantly, she had a business that was growing, clients who respected her work, and a future that looked bright with possibility. Her phone buzzed with another text from David. "Mom told me you're supposedly doing well. I'll believe it when I see it. You know you can't keep this up forever." Emma looked at the message and felt nothing but sadness for the man who'd once been her partner. David was so invested in her failure that he couldn't see her success. She typed back, "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, David, but I've found what I was looking for." She sent the message and then did something she'd never done before. She blocked his number. As Emma settled into bed that night, surrounded by colors and textures that made her happy, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. Every challenge she'd faced, from the garbage disposal to the DMV to the difficult client, had been a building block in the construction of her new life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove to herself that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. But tonight, for the first time in years, Emma fell asleep excited about her future. The scared woman who'd watched David drive away 4 months ago was still there, but she was sharing space with someone new, someone capable, confident, and ready to take on the world. 6 months after David walked out, Emma's life had become unrecognizable from the woman who'd once sat crying over unpaid bills. Bloom Creative had grown from a desperate attempt at independence to a thriving business with 12 regular clients and a waiting list for new projects that stretched 2 months out. The scared woman who'd been afraid to answer her phone because it might be a creditor had been replaced by someone who confidently negotiated contracts and commanded respect in business meetings. The transformation was evident in every aspect of her life, visible to anyone who knew the before and after. Her home office, once a folding table in the corner of the kitchen where she'd hidden her dreams from David's disapproving gaze, now occupied the entire spare bedroom with professional equipment that rivaled any design studio. She'd invested in a high-end computer, professional design software, a graphics tablet that responded to her every artistic impulse, and organized filing systems that made her feel like the businesswoman she'd always dreamed of becoming. The walls were covered with a gallery of awards and thank you notes from satisfied clients, each one a testament to the journey from rejected housewife to respected professional. But the awards weren't what filled Emma with pride. It was the handwritten notes from clients, telling her how her work had transformed their businesses, helped them tell their stories, made them feel understood and valued. The woman who'd once been afraid to drive to the DMV now confidently traveled across Phoenix for client meetings, networking events, and creative workshops. But the most profound change was internal. Emma had discovered a strength she never knew existed, a resilience that had been dormant under years of being told she couldn't survive on her own. "Emma, I can't thank you enough," said Dr. Amanda Chen, a veterinarian whose practice Emma had helped rebrand. They were at a networking event for women entrepreneurs, and Dr. Chen was practically glowing with excitement. "Since we launched the new brand, our client base has grown by 40%. You didn't just design a logo, you helped us tell our story." Emma smiled, accepting the compliment with the grace she'd learned to cultivate. That's what good branding does. It helps people connect with who you really are. The irony wasn't lost on her. In helping other businesses discover their authentic selves, Emma had found her own. The networking event was held at a trendy rooftop bar in downtown Phoenix, and Emma found herself genuinely enjoying the conversations with other business owners. A year ago, she would have been too intimidated to attend such an event. Now, She was exchanging business cards and scheduling coffee meetings with potential collaborators. "You're Emma Matthews, right?" A woman in her 50s approached, extending her hand. "I'm Patricia Williams from the Small Business Development Center. I've been hearing incredible things about your work." Emma shook Patricia's hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "It's nice to meet you, Patricia. The SBDC has been invaluable in helping me understand the business side of freelancing." "I'd love to talk to you about something," Patricia said. "We're putting together a mentorship program for women starting their own businesses. Would you be interested in being a mentor?" The request caught Emma off guard. "A mentor? But I've only been doing this for 6 months." "Exactly," Patricia said with a knowing smile. "You understand what it feels like to start from scratch. Sometimes the best mentors are the ones who've recently walked the path themselves," Emma considered. The offer, the idea of helping other women navigate the challenges of starting a business, filled her with excitement. "I'd love to learn more." As the evening wound down, Emma found herself on the rooftop terrace, looking out over the city lights. Phoenix sprawled out below her, a tapestry of possibilities and dreams. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, scared, dependent, convinced she couldn't survive on her own. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Saw your feature in the Phoenix Business Journal. So proud of you, dear. Coffee this weekend?" Emma smiled, thinking about the article that had come out that morning. "Local designer helps small businesses bloom," had been the headline, complete with a photo of Emma in her office, surrounded by examples of her work. The reporter had asked her about her journey from housewife to entrepreneur, and Emma had been honest about the challenges and triumphs. Starting over at 32 was terrifying, she'd told the reporter, but it was also the best thing that ever happened to me. I discovered I was capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined. Driving home that night, Emma reflected on how different her life had become. Her calendar was full of client meetings, creative projects, and social events. Her bank account was healthy, her business was growing, and she felt more fulfilled than she had in years. But perhaps most importantly, she'd learned to trust herself. That trust was put to the test the following Tuesday, when Emma received an unexpected visitor. She was working in her office when the doorbell rang, and through the peephole, she saw a familiar figure that made her heart skip a beat. David stood on her doorstep, looking exactly as he had 6 months ago. Expensive suit, perfect hair, confident posture, but something was different in his expression. The arrogance was still there, but it was tempered with something that looked almost like uncertainty. Emma opened the door, proud of how calm she felt. "Hello, David." "Emma." He looked past her into the house, taking in the changes, the artwork on the walls, the fresh flowers on the table, the warm colors that had replaced his preferred neutral palette. "You've redecorated." "I have." "What are you doing here?" David shifted uncomfortably. "I think we need to talk. About us. About our marriage." Emma leaned against the doorframe, not inviting him in. "I think we said everything we needed to say 6 months ago." "Emma, please. I've been thinking about what happened, and I realize I may have been... hasty. We can work this out." "Work what out, David?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their early dating days. "Our marriage. Our life together. I know I was hard on you about the whole business thing, but I can see now that you've proven your point." "My point?" "That you can handle some independence. It's cute, actually. You've done well for yourself." His tone was patronizing, as if he were complimenting a child for successfully tying her shoes. Emma felt a familiar flash of anger, but this time it was paired with something new: pity. "David, this isn't about proving a point. This is about me discovering who I am when I'm not being told who I should be. Look, I get it. You needed to spread your wings a little, but you've done that now. We can get back to normal." "Normal?" Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "David, normal was me being miserable and you being content with that. Normal was me making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. That's not a life I want to go back to." David's expression hardened. "I provided for you, Emma. I gave you a beautiful home, security, everything you could want. Except respect," Emma said quietly. "Except the belief that I was capable of more than being your accessory. That's not fair. I loved you." "You loved who you thought I should be," Emma corrected. "You never loved who I actually was." David looked around the neighborhood, his jaw tightening. "So, this is it. You're choosing this." He gestured dismissively at her house, her life, over our marriage. "I'm choosing myself," Emma said. "For the first time in 8 years, I'm choosing myself. And what about us? What about everything we built together?" Emma looked at the man she'd once thought she couldn't live without, and felt a profound sense of clarity. "What we built was your vision of what our life should be. I was just along for the ride." David stared at her for a long moment, and Emma could see him processing this new version of her, confident, articulate, unwilling to be diminished. This wasn't the woman he'd left behind 6 months ago. "You've changed," he said finally. "I've grown," Emma corrected. "There's a difference. I don't even recognize you anymore." Emma smiled, and for the first time since he'd arrived, it was genuine. "Good, because I don't recognize the woman I used to be either." David stood there for another moment, perhaps waiting for her to invite him in, to show some sign that she missed their old life. When none came, he straightened his tie, a gesture that seemed more nervous than confident now. "I hope you're happy," he said, but his tone suggested he hoped the opposite. "I am," Emma replied, "happier than I've been in years." After David left, Emma stood in her doorway watching his car disappear down the street. She waited for the familiar wave of doubt, the voice that would tell her she'd made a mistake, but instead, she felt only relief and a profound sense of pride. She'd faced her past and chosen her future. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of new opportunities. The Phoenix Business Journal article had generated more client inquiries than Emma could handle. She was faced with a decision she'd never expected to make: whether to expand her business or maintain its current intimate scale. "You could hire an assistant," suggested Rachel Torres during one of their project check-ins, "or even bring on another designer. Bloom Creative could become a real agency." Emma considered the idea as she worked on the final elements of the tech company's rebrand. Growth was tempting, but she'd learned to trust her instincts about what felt right for her life. "I think I want to stay small for now," she told Rachel. "I love the personal connection I have with each client. If I grow too fast, I might lose that." Rachel nodded approvingly. "That's smart. Too many people chase growth for growth's sake and lose sight of what made them successful in the first place." That weekend, Emma attended a gallery opening for a local artist whose work she'd discovered at a coffee shop. The gallery was filled with vibrant paintings that seemed to pulse with life and energy, and Emma found herself drawn to a particular piece of abstract representation of a woman emerging from a cocoon. Her wings spread wide against a backdrop of warm desert colors. "That's one of my favorites," said a voice behind her. Emma turned to see a woman in her 40s with paint-stained fingers and eyes that sparkled with creativity. "Are you the artist?" Emma asked. Guilty as charged. "I'm Sandra Reeves. I've been seeing your work around town. You designed the logo for my friend Maria's coffee shop." They fell into easy conversation about art, creativity, and the challenges of building a business around passion. Sandra had been painting for 15 years, but had only recently started selling her work seriously. "I spent too many years listening to people tell me art wasn't a real career," Sandra explained. "Finally, I decided their opinions mattered less than my happiness." Emma understood completely. They exchanged contact information, and Emma left the gallery with both a new friend and a commissioned piece, the painting of the woman with wings, which would hang in her office as a reminder of her own transformation. On Sunday, Emma met Margaret for their weekly coffee date, a tradition that had developed naturally over the past few months. Margaret had become an unofficial mentor, sharing wisdom from her own journey of independence and offering perspective when Emma faced difficult decisions. "You're different today," Margaret observed as they sat on the patio of their favorite cafe, lighter somehow. Emma told her about David's visit, about the choice she'd made to prioritize her own happiness over the familiar comfort of her old life. "I'm proud of you," Margaret said, reaching across the table to squeeze Emma's hand. "It takes courage to choose the unknown over the familiar, especially when the familiar comes with promises of security." "Did you ever doubt your decision to stay single after your husband died?" Emma asked. Margaret considered the question carefully. "There were moments when I wondered if it would be easier to find someone to take care of the hard parts of life. But I realized that when someone else handles the hard parts, they also get to control the important decisions. I wasn't willing to give up my autonomy for the illusion of security." That evening, Emma sat in her office working on a logo for a startup founded by two women who'd left corporate jobs to pursue their dream of creating sustainable children's clothing. As she sketched concepts that represented growth, transformation, and environmental consciousness, Emma reflected on her own journey. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman defined by her relationship to someone else, David's wife, not Emma the individual. Now, she was Emma Matthews, founder of Bloom Creative, mentor to aspiring entrepreneurs, and most importantly, a woman who trusted her own judgment. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Patricia from the Small Business Development Center. "Emma, I have an exciting opportunity for you. The city is looking for someone to redesign their small business support materials, brochures, website, the whole package. It's a substantial contract, and I immediately thought of you." Emma felt the familiar thrill of a new challenge. "Tell me more." As Patricia outlined the project, Emma took notes and asked questions with the confidence of someone who knew her. The project would be high-profile, well-paying, and exactly the kind of work she'd dreamed of doing. "I'm very interested," Emma said. "When do they need a proposal?" "Next Friday. Think you can put something together by then?" "Absolutely." After hanging up, Emma looked around her office at the awards and thank you notes covering one wall, at the professional equipment she'd invested in, at the painting of the woman with wings that would arrive next week. This space represented everything she'd built from nothing, powered by determination and a growing belief in her own capabilities. Her computer chimed with an email from a potential client, a nonprofit organization that helped women transition out of abusive relationships. They'd seen her work and wanted to discuss a pro bono project to redesign their marketing materials. Emma smiled as she read the email. Working with an organization that helped women find their strength and independence felt like the perfect next step in her journey. She typed a response immediately, offering to meet with them the following week. As the evening settled over Phoenix, Emma stepped onto her back patio with a cup of tea. The desert air was warm but comfortable, and the mountains in the distance were silhouetted against a sky painted in shades of orange and pink. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, afraid to drive to the DMV, convinced she couldn't survive without someone else taking care of her. That woman felt like a stranger now. Emma pulled out her phone and composed a text to Sarah. "Just wanted you to know that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Sarah's response came quickly. "I always knew you had it in you. You just needed the chance to discover it for yourself. Love you, sis." As Emma settled into bed that night, she thought about the future. There would be challenges ahead, difficult clients, creative blocks, business decisions that would test her judgment. But she faced those possibilities without fear, armed with the knowledge that she could handle whatever came her way. She'd learned to fix a garbage disposal and navigate the DMV. She'd built a business from scratch and discovered she could command respect in professional settings. She'd faced down her own limiting beliefs and emerged stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. Most importantly, she'd learned that the voice telling her she wasn't capable had never been her on it, had been the echo of people who benefited from her feeling small. Emma smiled in the darkness, thinking about the nonprofit meeting next week, the city contract proposal she'd start tomorrow, and all the women she'd have the chance to mentor through the SBDC program. Her life was full of purpose, creativity, and connections that nourished her spirit. David had been wrong about many things, but he'd been spectacularly wrong about one thing in particular. Emma hadn't just survived without him. She'd thrived in ways she never could have imagined while living in his shadow. As sleep began to claim her, Emma's last conscious thought was a promise to herself. She would never again make herself small for someone else's comfort. The woman she'd become was too valuable, too capable, and too authentically herself to ever go back to being someone else's limited vision of who she should be. 6 months ago, David had told her she wouldn't last a week without him. Tonight, Emma fell asleep as the successful founder of a thriving business, a valued member of her community, and most importantly, a woman who knew her own worth. She'd proven that sometimes being underestimated truly is the greatest gift of all, because it gives you the chance to surprise everyone, especially yourself.